Anything, and usually terrible things, can happen in Riverdale, and they do occur in every season, which is why so many things go wrong. Let's count down the top controversies ever. Number 10, teenagers turning to arson to solve problems. Holy smokes! The obsession of teenagers with fire is on another level. Betty burnt her house after Alice sold it, and although she only scorched the living room, the attempt itself was crazy. Cheryl, however, went all the way and completely burned down her house. In a more recent scenario, Jughead and Betty burned down the Joneses' old trailer to disrupt business. Sadly, all these fires are no longer surprising in Riverdale. It sends the message that anytime someone has a problem with anything, they can always set the problem on fire, literally. Fortunately, or unfortunately, the adults and the police don't care about the arsons, otherwise Jughead, Cheryl, and Betty would all be in jail. Which brings us to the other massive problem in Riverdale. 9. Law enforcement is a joke. It's so insane that a bunch of teenagers in Riverdale solve all the major crimes in the town, yet people have been employed to do that job. Once in a while, the adults try to help, but in most cases, the teenagers crack the cases. And it's not that law enforcement doesn't exist. They're there, but they are totally useless and simply don't care what happens in the town. When Tom Keller was the sheriff, he wasn't doing much to solve the cases, but he supposedly made an excellent boxing coach afterward. And let's not even begin with Sheriff Mineta and his connections to the lodges. At the end of Season 3, a new sheriff was introduced, and we can only hope that he takes law enforcement a bit more seriously. Unfortunately, the man who was once in prison and hooked to drinking was the best candidate for sheriff. But we'll give him the benefit of the doubt because he's already going after the people dealing with illegal substances. Number 8. School doesn't matter. Riverdale Season 4 comes with the promise of more high school experience, which is a bit late since they are in the final year. From the past seasons, we've gathered that in Riverdale, school doesn't matter. In Season 3, they sat for their SATs, but the only person we saw struggling was Archie, and it was unrealistic that out of the many students, he was the only one having problems. Okay, we may understand that watching a bunch of kids in class taking tests isn't exciting, but what's the point of giving the show a school setup with no schooling happening? The worst part is that the after-school club seems to be joining a gang. For such a small town, the number of gangs and crimes is just ridiculous. It's reached a point where everyone is okay with the gangs and the students freely join the gangs and the cults like it's no big deal. Jeez. Then there's something else with the school we'll probably never understand. Okay, the musical episodes in Riverdale are some of the best, but how do they explain a bunch of students suddenly sounding incredibly amazing? Unless the school secretly offers performing arts, it doesn't make sense. But we won't complain much about that for now because the musical episodes are surprisingly very thrilling. 7. What's the deal with some characters, especially Veronica? First of all, whoever writes Veronica's lines needs to chill and think that character through. She's very promising, yet everything she says somehow comes out weird. Many of her dialogues are just off. And how in the world does Veronica, a teenager, own a speakeasy? If you may recall, that business went from serving mocktails to illegal gambling and drinking very fast. And judging by what we last saw, business is booming. And I bet it will also be something a teenager shouldn't be doing. According to sources, the business will land her into problems with the law, but there's barely any law enforcement in Riverdale. Hopefully, there will be some solution to all the illegal madness. Then there's Jughead. For many people, he grew unbearable and unrealistic, so nobody realized that he was homeless for months, including his best friend and the owner of the drive-in. All that time he was homeless, he had nice clothes, food, and a normal social life in school. Come on! It's something viewers were forced to accept without a reasonable explanation. And Archie, it's as if the writers decided to major on his dumb side, and it gets worse. Plus, if I heard $1 for every time Archie was shirtless on the show, I'd be rich. It's so unnecessary. Number 6, the farm. With all that's happening in Riverdale, the farm isn't a surprise to anyone. However, the presence of the farm in the school is unbelievable. In fact, the former principal, Weatherby, was a member. How convenient for the cult members. Thank God there's a new principal in Season 4, and according to sources, he may be a bit tough on the students. Before Weatherby even joined the cult, he let the members meet in the school, and at one point they held hands over flames in a science classroom. And let's not forget how Alice tried to convince Betty to join the cult like it's so natural for a mother to convince her daughter to join a cult. The worst part about the farm is that it turned out to be an organ harvesting scheme with a master hypnotist. Luckily, there's a chance that the farm storyline will finally come to an end, and Betty might ultimately save her mother and sister. 5. The Serpent Initiation Dance for Women. The fact the Serpent was a gang led by a teenager was in itself unfortunate, and the sound of the initiation alone sounds very disturbing. The Serpent Initiation Dance for Women? What? We don't expect the gang to be clean, but the initiation dance was awful. The women had to do a traditional dance with a pole on the stage, and Betty actually tried it. The worst part, her mother was present, and she didn't do much to stop her. It wasn't only her mom, her boyfriend's dad, and a bunch of old bikers were also present. The dance is probably one of the worst things to ever happen on the show, and shooting that scene must have been excruciatingly awkward. Later on, the serpents changed, and Betty was the queen and Jughead the king, but the fact that the showrunners thought of having such an initiation dance on the show in the first place is out of this world. 4. Too many episodes. It's good to note that prolonging episodes isn't just a Riverdale problem, it's a CW problem. Season 1 started strongly with a few episodes. Characters were introduced, the story was tight, and it ended with a shocking cliffhanger. I think the show was only supposed to have one season, and the creators were overwhelmed when it was renewed. Season 2 introduced viewers to the serial killer, Black Hood, but his story was dragged throughout the 22 episodes. Season 3 suffered the same problem, and they had to unmask a Gargoyle King twice before exposing Chick. The mystery of the farm was also dragged on for so long, and the cult leader only appeared in episode 16. Of course, that problem will not be solved in Season 4 because the show can't drastically go back to fewer episodes. Season 3 already ended in another cliffhanger, and all we can hope is that the 4th season will keep viewers at the edge of their seats throughout. The brains behind the show promised fans a different perspective, and we hope they stick to their word without unnecessarily dragging storylines. 3. Family dysfunction. Yes, I admit that all families go through their ups and downs, and sometimes it can get really messy. In other cases, family members may not get along with another family like the Coopers and Blossoms. In most cases, it's the innocent children who bear the consequences of the hatred between their parents or even their grandparents. When Betty got pregnant for Jason, her parents were obviously mad, and what they did was uncalled for. Sending her to a special cases home for no apparent reason was insane. On the other hand, the Blossoms sent Cheryl to a boarding school to maintain the picture-perfect status. Okay, Cheryl can be a bit overdramatic, but the girl merely wanted to find her brother's murderer. Generally, families in Riverdale are very dysfunctional, which is insane because it's such a small town. The show's kind of family setup is not something many viewers are comfortable watching. Is your family that dysfunctional? 2. How to get caught in Riverdale. In Riverdale, committing crimes is obviously not a big deal, and the crimes range from anything to murder. Well, it's not like there's anyone who does a thorough checkup, so the culprits can always get away with it. In one of the worst scenarios, Betty walked in on her mother cleaning up after a murder, and she insisted on helping her. Later, she confided in Jughead, who helped her ditch the car and the dead man's phone. She didn't feel safe enough and asked F.P. Jones for help, and he also helped in the cover-up. The crew decided to meet up and talk about the murder in the most unusual place. F.P., Betty, Alice, and Jughead met in a booth to discuss how they hid the body of the guy Chick did away with. So, in Riverdale, it's common to talk about homicide in the open. Wow. Okay, let's forget for a second that the cover-up should be a big deal. Don't they know what houses are for? A home should be a safe place to discuss details of a murder, not a booth. Number 1. Statutory rape disguised as a romance. In the comics, Archie goes back and forth between Veronica and Betty, but the show decided to give him a new perspective. He's smitten by his music teacher, Geraldine Grundy, and the two have a fling in summer. In the comics, Geraldine Grundy is the elderly high school principal. First of all, it's problematic because of their age difference, and the fact that the teacher goes along with it is too messed up. There's no place on earth a teacher is legally allowed to have a romantic relationship with their student. What made it worse is that at some point, the music teacher took advantage of Archie to save herself from being investigated, and she used the identity of a deceased woman. It was considered sexy that Archie was hitting on a hot female teacher, yet it is wrong on so many different levels. The show made no effort to show how ending the relationship affected Archie, and they quickly had him involved in other relationships. Since then, Archie is always jumping from one girl to another, and we rarely see him single. The controversies could go on and on, but we'll leave it at that for now. We have to wait and see what Season 4 has in store for us. Let us know what you think of the show so far.